Thank you. I declare the 11th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly resumed. Before proceeding further, I would like to remind members that all meeting participants are encouraged to consider wearing a mask while indoors, including in the General Assembly Hall and in conference rooms. Members will recall that in paragraph 3 of its resolution ES 11/3 of 7th of April 2022, the Assembly decided, I quote, to adjourn the 11th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly temporarily and to authorize the President of the General Assembly to resume its upon request from Member States, end of quote. In this regard, I should like to draw the attention of the delegations to document A/ES 11/8, which contains a letter dated 3rd of October 2022 from the permanent representatives of Albania and Ukraine to the United Nations, requesting the resumption of the 11th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly. I intend to conduct the proceedings of this meeting in accordance with the rules of procedure of the General Assembly and the past practices of its emergency special sessions. In accordance with Rule 63 of the rules of procedure of the General Assembly, the President and Vice Presidents of the 77th session shall serve in the same capacity at the resumed 11th Emergency Special Session. May I take it that it is the wish of the General Assembly to decide that the Credentials Committee of the 77th session should serve for the resumed 11th Emergency Special Session? It is so decided. In keeping with established practice, I should now like to invite the attention of the General Assembly to document A/ES 11/9 concerning Member States that are in arrears in the payment of their financial contributions to the United Nations within the terms of Article 19 of the Charter. May I take it that the Assembly duly takes note of the information contained in this document? It is so decided. In this connection, may I further take it that it is the wish of the General Assembly to follow the provisions of the Resolution 77/2 of 7th of October 2022, by which the Comoros, Sao Tome and Principe, and Somalia are permitted to vote in the General Assembly until the end of its 77th session, and to also allow these Member States to vote at the 11th Emergency Special Session. It is so decided. The General Assembly will now resume its consideration of Agenda Item 5, entitled Letter dated February 2014 from the Permanent Representative of Ukraine to the United Nations, addressed to the President of the Security Council, S/2014/136, end of quote. In this connection, the Assembly has before it a draft resolution contained in document A/ES 11/L5. I give the floor to the representative of Albania on point of order.
Thank you, President. I have a point of order to raise before we proceed with agenda item 5 of the 11th emergency special session. Would like to propose that the General Assembly adopts a decision confirming that the General Assembly will apply Rule 87B of the Rules of Procedure to take recorded vote by electronic means when action is taken on the resolution L5, and that action will not be taken by a secret ballot. The reason for this proposed decision is that Russia has circulated a proposal to all member states formally requesting that action on the resolution be through a secret ballot. In the interest of avoiding confusion, the GA should clarify this issue now. Russia's proposal is an attempt to threaten transparency in the GA. Wouldn't we all want transparency from the international community if a neighboring country invaded and attempted to annex a portion of our territory? Would any member state of the GA support a secret ballot if it was their own territory that someone was trying to annex? The Russian Federation is citing as precedent a 1977 decision to hold the secret ballot in the UN GA. That decision only applies to the narrow choice of the venue for a UN session. In fact, the rest of the resolution was not decided by secret ballot. Indeed, it was adopted by consensus. The decision that Russian Federation cites is not applicable as precedent. A decision on a venue is similar to a decision to elect member states or individuals to UN bodies, which are held by secret ballot. There is no precedent for the GA to hold a secret ballot on a non-venue issue, let alone on an important question of international peace and security. For the entire history of the UN, substantive resolutions, such as the one we have before us today, have been held by a recorded vote, as provided in the Rules of Procedure. Therefore, there is no basis for suspending the Rules of Procedure on voting. We should not play with words, and we should not establish dangerous precedents. Even if it is legally possible to suspend the Rules of Procedure, it is entirely unjustified for this resolution. To conduct a secret ballot on a GA decision would go against decades of precedent and undermine the practices of the world's most representative deliberative body. In this case, we request all member states to vote in favor of our proposed decision to confirm that Rule 87B will apply when action is taken on the draft resolution L5, and that action will not be taken by secret ballot. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania. The representative of Albania has moved that decision on draft resolution A/ES11/L5 be made by a recorded vote pursuant to Rule 87 of the Rules of Procedure, which provides that, I quote, any representative may request a recorded vote, end of quote, and not by secret ballot. Now I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Благодарю вас, господин председатель. Господин председатель, я не очень понимаю, на что ссылается представитель Албании, не говоря уже о том, чем не нравится представителю Албании тайное голосование и как это противоречит демократическим принципам, проповедуемым. Хочу обратить внимание, что Российская Федерация не ставила вопрос, пока не ставила вопрос о проведении голосования по резолюции тайным голосованием. Мы планировали это сделать сделать непосредственно перед принятием резолюции, но поставленный делегацией Албании вопрос относится к реализации отдельной процедурной возможности, предусмотренной правилом 87б, а именно потребовать голосования с внесением результатов в отчет заседания. Наша делегация планировала и планирует поставить вопрос о принятии решения тайным голосованием посредством приостановки действия правила 87 в целом. Для того, чтобы понять, может ли быть реализована процедурная возможность в рамках пункта Б правила 87, сначала надо разобраться с тем, действует это правило или приостанавливается. Поэтому первым, разумеется, должно быть рассмотрено российское предложение. Иной порядок просто не имел бы смысла. Но даже если против всяческой логики будет принято решение сначала провести по отдельному голосование по отдельному вопросу в рамках пункта Б правила 87, мы хотели бы сразу же подчеркнуть следующее. Это никак не предрешает и не отменяет рассмотрение самостоятельного предложения нашей делегации о том, чтобы приостановить действие правила 87 целиком для проведения тайного голосования. Мы такое предложение внесем. Благодарю вас.
The representative of the Russian Federation has made an objection to the motion. Pursuant to Rule 71 of the Rules of Procedure, the point of order shall be immediately decided. I shall now put to the recorded vote the motion by the representative of Albania that decision on draft resolution A/ES11/L5 be made by a recorded vote and not by secret ballot. The recorded vote on this motion will be decided by a simple majority of members present and voting. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of the motion by the representative of Albania that decision on draft resolution A/ES11/L5 be taken by a recorded vote and not by secret ballot. The delegation of the Syrian Arab Republic is asking for the floor. I'll give the floor if it is only on the conduct of the vote.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President.
الحقيقة ما فهمته من طلب
what I understood
وفد الاتحاد الروسي أنه ينوي
from the
أو يطرح
Russian Federation's
تصويت على
request is
تعليق
that
مادي وليس على
they
الاقتراع
will
السري.
propose the suspension of an article and not
لكن قراركم أن تذهبوا
of the
باتجاه
rule and
الاقتراع
not the secret
التصويت على
ballot,
مقترح
but your
الاقتراع السري
decision
الذي اعترضت عليه
to continue and proceed with Albania's
إذا كان فهمي صحيح
proposal was the reaction. If my understanding was correct, the Russian Federation requested something different and did not propose the issue of a secret ballot. I hope to clarify this situation.
So let me continue. Thank you much for the intervention. Let me continue. The recorded vote on this motion will be decided by a simple majority of member states present and voting. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of the motion by the representative of Albania that decision on draft resolution A/ES11/L5 be taken by a recorded vote and not by secret ballot, please signify. Those against, abstentions. Members are reminded that at this stage, the General Assembly is voting on the motion of the representative of Albania and not on the draft resolution itself.
The General Assembly is now voting on the motion by the representative of Albania that decision on draft resolution A/11/L5 be taken by recorded vote and not by secret ballot. Those who vote yes will be voting in favor of the use of a recorded vote as proposed by Albania. Those who vote no will be voting against the motion proposed by Albania and in favor of a secret ballot. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 107, against 13, abstention 39. The motion by the representative of Albania is adopted. The General Assembly therefore will take decision on draft resolution A/ES11/L5 by a recorded vote after the debate on the item. We shall now continue with the debate on agenda item 5. Excellencies, the war in Ukraine should have been never started. But it will end one day. Guns will be silent, but when? At what cost? How many people will have died? How many families separated? How much more suffering endured? What will Ukraine look like when peace returns? And what will the world look like? Столько жизней потеряно.
So many lives have been lost.
Столько всего разрушено.
So much has been destroyed.
В этой войне не будет победителей.
There will be no victors in this war.
Проигрывают все.
Everyone will lose.
Les prix de l'alimentaire sont enflambés.
Food prices
La
are
faim
skyrocketing.
et la famine menacent des communautés dans le monde entier.
Is threatening communities throughout the world.
I thank the Secretary General for leading on the Black Sea Grain Initiative. وقد أدت هذه الصفقة التي توسطت فيها الأمم المتحدة إلى تحرير 6 مليون طن على الأقل من المواد الغذائية. أكثر من ربعها يذهب مباشرة إلى الدول ذات الدخل المنخفض.
to low-income countries.
We shall act together to achieve the full implementation of this initiative. And it is imperative that we secure its renewal beyond mid-November. Excellencies, as the horrors in Ukraine were not enough, we are forced to live with the constant fear of nuclear disaster. I commend the work of the IAEA to ensure the safety of nuclear plants in the war zone. The IAEA has warned there is, I quote, playing with fire, end of quote. When it comes to nuclear issues, any irresponsible action or statement is unacceptable. And any threat of using nuclear weapons should be universally condemned. The UN Charter is clear. The General Assembly has been clear. The Secretary General has been clear. Aggression is illegal. The GA resolution of 14th of December 1974 defines aggression as the use of armed force by a state against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of another state. This act is called as inconsistent with the Charter. Invading a neighbor is illegal. Article 4 of the UN Charter states that, I quote, all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, end of quote. Annexing territories of other countries by force is illegal. The GE resolution of 24th of October 1970, the Declaration on Principles of International Law concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states, has reinforced that the territory of a state shall not be object of acquisition by another state resulting from a threat or use of force. It is incompatible with the purposes and principles of the Charter. And as the Secretary General pointed out, the referenda in the occupied regions, I quote, cannot be called a genuine expression of the popular will, end of quote. When it comes a daily routine to watch images of destroyed cities and scattered bodies, we lose our humanity. We must find a political solution based on the UN Charter and the international law. We need to keep the door open for diplomacy. The fighting between Russia and Ukraine must stop. As the General Assembly has decided in its resolution adopted on March the 2nd, 2022, I quote, troops of the Russian Federation must be withdrawn from the territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, end of quote. Without shared rules, a world without peace, a world without future. We must recommit to the values, principles, and purposes of the Charter. If we want to move forward as a global community, we must provide answers. The world is looking to us. Thank you. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine to introduce draft resolution A/ES11/L5.
Good afternoon. It's going to be a very difficult task for me today, for many reasons. It's barely 4 p.m. in New York, but my day has started almost 14 hours ago. It started 14 hours ago because my country was under attack. My immediate family was in a residential building under attack, unable to go to a bomb shelter because there was no electricity. Because Russia has already killed some of my family members, and we see no end to that cruelty. But let me start with a quote from a very respected gentleman in his country, from the president who was the first president ever directly elected in his country in a democratic way. And that is José Serrato, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Uruguay, at the 6th plenary meeting of the UN Conference on International Organization in San Francisco on May the 1st, 1945, and I quote, "A stable and sane peace cannot be attained if nothing is done for the democratization of the world and the rule of freedom." Peace and democracy constitute complementary objectives, each of which is a guarantee and a motive for the either. In this regard, in the proposed international organization, there should not be admitted nations professing doctrines of aggression and war, which are inclined to undermine or destroy the order of juridical peace in the world. However, in order to be a member of international society, it is not enough to present the titles of peace-loving nations, but it is also necessary to be a freedom-loving nation. End of quote. José Serrato of Uruguay. This is how our predecessors saw the way to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war at the dawn of our organization 77 years ago. Unfortunately, you can hardly hope for a stable and sane peace as long as an unstable and insane dictatorship exists in your vicinity. A dictatorship that actively uses missile terror against the civilian population and infrastructure. Today, terrorist Russia shelled the capital city of Kiev and many other Ukrainian cities throughout the country with at least 84 missiles and 24 UAVs. Energy facilities, residential buildings, schools and universities, museums, and crossroads in the city centers were among the targets that the Russian Defense Ministry later declared legitimate. The entire world has once again seen the true face of the terrorist state that kills our people. Suffering defeats on the battlefield, Russia takes it out on the peaceful residents of Ukrainian cities. Today's strike killed at least 14 civilians and 97 were wounded. Deliberate targeting of civilians is a war crime. By launching missile attacks on civilians, sleeping in their homes or rushing to work, children going to schools, Russia has proven once again that it is a terrorist state that must be deterred in the strongest possible ways. We need this to prevent further heinous atrocities and to secure our achievements within this organization. The UN has survived many challenges, including bloc confrontation and Soviet threats. In this very hall, addressed to the world, threats addressed to the UN and its Secretary General. As King Hussein of Jordan said in 1960, standing exactly where, yet almost from the birth, Soviet Union has sought to destroy the United Nations, to its deliberations, to block its decisions, to demean the reputation of the Security Council and the Secretary and the General Assembly. End of quote. I sign under each of these votes in 2022, standing exactly where the leader of Jordan was 62 years ago. What we are witnessing now is an attempt by Russia to revive the so-called Brezhnev doctrine, envisaging that the Soviet Union could limit the principle of prohibition of the use of force if its interests in other states within so-called zone of influence were challenged. Incompatibility of this doctrine with the UN Charter was clear even for the Soviet Union. And at the end of the day, the USSR had to officially give it up. Let me quote President Gorbachev. It is evident, for example, that force and the threat of force can no longer be and should not be instruments of foreign policy, said the then Soviet president in this very hall in December 1988. These words, however, mean nothing for modern Russia, who is occupying the USSR permanent seat at the Security Council and thus is allowed to block any action by the Council to restore international peace and security. Mr. President, Russia now tries its best to bring us back to the 1930s, not even 1940s, when Hitler destroyed sovereign nations by invasion, fake referendums, and Anschluss. And we are now at a tipping point where the United Nations will either restore its credibility or it will ultimately fall in failure. And if the latter happens, we should blame nobody but ourselves, because it is our responsibility to defend the principles of the UN Charter. A trail of blood is left behind the Russian delegation when it enters the General Assembly. And the hall is filled up with the smell of smoldering human flesh. That's what we have tolerated too long in Syria. That's what is happening today in Ukraine. Same dictator in the Kremlin, same Russian generals well known for scorched earth tactics in wars led in Syria and in Chechnya and today in Ukraine. Since 23rd September, Russia has been committing another crime against international law and its principles, committing it in an territorial integrity and the inviolability of borders were a privilege with limited access, not the right of every nation. The sham referendums in 4 Ukrainian regions, followed by unlawful decisions by the Russian president and parliament, served this very purpose and thus posed an existential threat to the United Nations and its charter. Ukrainians can tell you what our world will look like if this erosion of the UN's credibility is not stopped. If complete disregard for the UN Charter by a country occupying a permanent seat in the Security Council meets any response but zero tolerance. Death, human suffering and destruction are immediate outcomes. As it was in the city of Zaporizhia on the night of the 9th of October, when Russia fired over 20 missiles on residential areas which killed at least 13 and injured 60 civilians, including 6 children. And let me remind you that Zaporizhia is the main city of one of the 4 regions that Russia has claimed following the sham referendums. Moscow has even included the reference to Zaporizhia in its constitution. Please forgive me use of the term constitution in relation to that worthless piece of paper. It is indeed hard, if not impossible, for a normal human being to comprehend the logic of Putin and his cronies. First, you claim the seizure of an area of a neighboring sovereign state under the pretext of protection of local population. And then you kill this population with dozens of missiles. It is clear, however, that the so-called sham referendum served as an element of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, an element that was hastily prepared and implemented in response to the successful process of liberation of the occupied territories by the army of Ukraine. The so-called referendums bore no relation at all with what we are used to calling expression of the popular will, neither from the legal nor from the technical modalities. We are grateful to the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who was very clear and explicit in his condemnation of the Russian actions. And as he said, I quote, "Any decision to proceed with the annexation would have no legal value and deserves to be condemned. It cannot be reconciled with the international legal framework. It stands against everything the international community is meant to stand for. It flouts the purposes and principles of the United Nations. It must not be accepted," end of quote, said the Secretary General. Distinguished colleagues, Ukraine is indeed the immediate target of the Russian attacks on the ground, but it is not Ukraine that Russia ultimately aims at. Let me reiterate it again. It is our future that is now at stake. The future that cannot be secured by separate countries or regional arrangements if the United Nations is relegated to the backstage of global processes. Let me recall that the very first purpose of this organization, which is enshrined in Article 1 of its charter, is to maintain international peace and security, and to that end, to take effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace and for the suppression of acts of aggression. Paragraph 4 of Article 2 of the Charter constitutes the most important principle with regards to the above-mentioned purpose. In particular, we are speaking about the threat and use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of Ukraine. Violation of paragraph 4 of Article 2 of the Charter is a violation of the cornerstone of the peace in the Charter, the heart of the Charter, and even basic rule of contemporary international law as it has been labeled in legal writings. Dear colleagues, the only thing that Russia is afraid of is our strong unity of purpose in defense of the UN Charter, in defense of the right of every country to benefit from respect for its sovereignty and territorial integrity. We have to save the United Nations, not for the sake of these whole, high-level weeks or other procedural and protocol issues that have been our routine since 1945. We need to do it for the sake of ourselves as most of us will find ourselves extremely vulnerable and unprotected if the Russian vision of the future prevails. A future where only nuclear power, size of the armed forces, and number of warships and aircraft matter. How many of you would feel safe and secure in such a world? How many of you would deprive your children of the right to freely decide their own future? The answer seems obvious, and we have to rally around the UN Charter and to reconfirm that its principles remain a strong shield to protect all nations, large or small, members of alliances or neutral ones, on all continents. That was the spirit of our common commitment to safe succeeding, spirit that guided our predecessors in San Francisco 77 years ago. The same spirit should guide us now, in particular during the vote on the draft resolution, Territorial Integrity of Ukraine, defending the principles of the UN Charter. And to illustrate what unites us all, even if countries are 10,000 kilometers apart. Let me finish with a quote from the French Foreign Minister, Georges Bidault, at the conference in San Francisco in 1945. And I quote, "Justice is another word we must reinstate in all its loftiness. Justice in keeping with international democracy. Justice which gives full recognition to the rights of all countries, including those which do not come under the generally recognized term of great powers. A point I would particularly stress," said the French Foreign Minister in San Francisco. It will be a vote for the UN Charter, for each country, for each of our citizens, for your families, for your children. A vote for justice. And I urge you to support the draft. I thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ukraine. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
Уважаемые коллеги,
Colleagues,
хочу начать с процедурных вопросов. Вы сейчас все стали свидетелями возмутительного мошенничества, в котором, к большому сожалению, председатель Генассамблеи сыграл ключевую роль. Нам не дали слово по порядку ведения заседания, лампочка об этом до сих пор горит за нашей табличкой, исказили наше выступление, и сейчас пытаются украсть у стран-членов ООН право свободно высказывать точку зрения. Это беспрецедентная манипуляция, подрывающая авторитет Генассамблеи и ООН в целом. Разумеется, в этих условиях мы не стали голосовать. Заявляем наш решительный протест против вопиющего нарушения порядка ведения заседания. Как я уже сказал, российской делегации не дали слова. А сказать мы хотели прежде всего то, о чем напомнили сирийские коллеги. Мы не опротестовывали решение председателя. Вопрос был в другом. Мы не делали предложение, которое оспорило Албанию. Таким образом, вы, господин председатель, лишили Россию делегацию автора предложения
deprived
возможности
Russia
нормально
and
представить его и объяснить его
of the
выход.
possibility of presenting
Вместо
their
этого за
proposal and
нас это
explaining
сделали
it.
оппоненты.
Instead of that, our opponents took up about, is this fair play?
Требуем поставить вопрос
We
так, как мы просили.
demand
Действия
that
по оспариванию того, что
the issue
мы не
be
вносили,
presented the way
не
we
имеет
said.
никакого смысла.
Any
Я
action
еще к этому
against what we
вернусь.
didn't introduce is devoid of any
Господин
sense, and I will
председатель,
revert to
уважаемые
that
коллеги,
later. Mr. President and distinguished
Генеральная
colleagues,
Ассамблея
the General
создавалась как
Assembly was
универсальная
created
и
as a
наиболее инклюзивная
universal and the most
площадка для
inclusive
равноправного диалога
platform for
суверенных
equal
государств.
dialogue of sovereign states.
В этом зале было
In
принято много
this hall,
судьбоносных решений,
many a momentous decision was
сформировавших
passed,
правовые,
which formed the
социально-экономические,
legal, socio-economic
культурные контуры
cultural,
международного сообщества.
Outlines of the
И
international
разработка этих решений
community.
шла
And
на основе
the
поиска
development
общих
of this
знаменателей,
decision was on the basis of
компромиссов
looking for
и в духе
common
сотрудничества и взаимодействия.
denominator compromises and
К
guided by the
сожалению,
spirit
сейчас в стенах
of
ООН продвигаются
cooperation and
совершенно другие
interaction.
установки.
Unfortunately, within the walls
Такого
of the
размаха
UN, something
цинизма,
very different
конфронтации
is being
и
witnessed.
крайне
Such
опасной
cynicism,
поляризации,
confrontation,
как
and
сейчас,
dangerous
не было в
polarization
истории Всемирной
as today we
организации.
have never seen in the history of
Особенно
the UN.
рельефно это проявляется на
And
данной
this
сессии,
is particularly clear,
политизированность
and
которой
this
вытекает уже из
session,
того,
the
что она
politicized nature
специально
of which
создана
stems from the
для
fact that
продвижения
it is
нарратива,
convened
направленного против одного
specifically
государства,
to push forward a
Российской
narrative
Федерации.
against one state, the Russian
Все
Federation.
остальные аспекты
All other
методично закладывались западными государствами как минимум с 2014
foundations
года,
for which were
а
laid by
точнее
the Western
задолго до этого.
states at least in
Старательно
2014,
оставляются
but
ими
actually
за скобками
long
дискуссии.
before then, are being left
Словно и
outside
не
of
было
the scope of the
антиконституционного
discussion.
майданного
It's as though
переворота,
there hadn't
трагедии
been
в
an
Одессе,
anti-constitutional Maidan
методического
coup, the
ущемления
tragedy in
прав
Odessa,
русскоязычного
depriving
населения,
the Russian
агрессии
speakers of their
киевского
rights,
режима
aggression of the
против
Kiev
Донбасса
regime against
и
Donbass,
массовых убийств его мирных
mass
жителей.
murders
В
of its
Вашингтоне, Лондоне,
inhabitants in Washington,
Брюсселе
in London, in
и ряде
Brussels.
других ставить часы,
People are trying to stop the
сделать
clock,
вид, что
to
история
pretend
начинается
that
лишь с февраля
history
2022 года.
has only begun
Для Запада
in
вообще
February
любой период
2022.
истории
In the West,
начинается с
any
удобного для
period
него
of
времени.
history starts from the
В
time that's
качестве
convenient
предлога
for
для
them. As
возобновления
a
спецсессии
pretext for the
использованы
resumption of the special
низкопробные и
session,
беспрецедентные
very
провокации в Совете
low-grade
Безопасности.
provocations were
Нам
used in the
предлагалось
Security Council.
поддержать
We
документ,
were
в котором мы осуждали бы
proposed
самих себя.
that we vote
Причем
for a
тут
document
поддержание
which is
мира и
condemning us
безопасности
ourselves.
или поиск
What
путей
does this
урегулирования?
have? We are trying to
Это
settle
еще один
conflicts.
шаг к
This was
расколу
yet
и эскалации, которая,
one more step
мы
towards
уверен,
division
не
and
нужна
escalation, which
подавляющему
I am sure
числу
is not
государств,
something that the absolute
представители которых
majority
находятся
of
сегодня в
states
этом
in
зале.
this room need.
Те, кто следит за
Those
дискуссиями в
who are
Совете
following your discussions
Безопасности,
in the
знают,
Security Council
что мы
know
были
very
готовы
well that
согласовать
stood
сбалансированный и
ready to
конструктивный
agree
проект,
a
в
balanced and
котором предлагали
constructive
прописать,
draft in
в
which
том
we
числе
propose
призыв к
that we
поиску
also state
дипломатического пути
an
разрешения
appeal
кризиса.
for diplomatic
Наши
resolution of the
предложения
crisis.
нашли
Our
позитивный отклик у
proposals
многих
were
партнеров по Совету
reacted to
Безопасности.
positively in many a
Однако
partner within the
западному
Security
лагерю
Council,
они,
but the
разумеется,
Western
оказались
camp
ненужными.
obviously ended
Как
up
мы
not
слышим
needing
из
them.
их
As we
заявлений,
hear from
мир на
their
Украине им не
statements,
нужен
peace
принцип.
in Ukraine is not something they
НАТО,
need in
с которой
principle.
мы на
NATO,
самом деле столкнулись на
with
Украине,
which we
нужна исключительно
encountered
эскалация
in Ukraine,
конфликта
only needs
как
the
ступень к
escalation in
заветному
the
плану,
conflict at a step
вынашивавшему
towards they
цели
have been working on for many
победить
years,
или хотя бы
namely to
максимально ослабить
overcome, to
Россию.
be victorious, or at least severely
В этих целях
undermine
Украина
Russia.
была давно
And
выбрана этими
Ukraine
странами,
was chosen by
поставлена
these
ими под
countries
контроль.
for that purpose,
А
was
сегодня
brought
она
under their
является
control,
полигоном
and today
для
is a
испытания натовских
platform
вооружений
for the
и
testing
битвы
of
против
NATO
России
weaponry
чужими руками
and for
до
a
последнего
combat
украинца.
against Russia using
Свои
other
геополитические
people
проекты,
down to the last
направленные на
Ukraine.
сохранение
Their
доминирования
geopolitical
западных
projects
государств,
aimed at
поддержание
keeping their
благополучия
domination,
так
the domination
называемого
of
золотого
Western states,
миллиарда, они
maintaining
стремятся
the
вовлечь как
well-being
можно
of the
больше
so-called
стран.
golden billion is something that they're trying to involve as many countries as
Уважаемые
possible
коллеги,
into.
так же
Distinguished
как
colleagues,
раньше нам ставили в вину стремление защитить права народов в Азии и Африке и Латинской Америке от колониализма и эксплуатации,
when we tried to save the peoples
сегодня
of
нас
Asia, Africa, and
критикуют
Latin
за
America
защиту
from
прав и свобод
colonialism and
наших
exploitation.
братьев и сестер
Here,
на юге и
once
востоке
again, we
Украины.
are being accused when we are trying
Прежде
to
всего,
protect our
их право
brothers
на
and
жизнь,
sisters in
а
eastern
также
Ukraine.
право говорить
Their
на своем
right
родном
to
языке,
life, first and foremost,
обучать на
the
нем
right to
своих
speak
детей,
their language,
чтить
to teach
героев,
their children in
освобождавших
their
свою землю
language,
от
to honor
фашистов,
the
а
heroes
не
who
тех, кто с
liberated
ними
their lands from
сотрудничал
fascism,
и
rather
помогал
those who
убивать мирное население.
collaborated with them and helped kill peaceful
Тех,
citizens.
кого нынешнее украинское руководство называло особями, нелюдями и призывало убираться в Россию ради будущего своих детей и внуков. Тех, кто услышал этот призыв и принял решение быть вместе с Россией. Об этом красноречиво свидетельствует выбор миллионов мирных людей, зафиксированный на референдуме в ДНР, ЛНР, Запорожье и на Херсонщине, на которых подавляющее большинство проголосовавших поддержало идею вхождения этих регионов в Россию. В наши дни в условиях доступности сотен тысяч видеороликов и комментариев в соцсетях сложно спорить с тем, что их волеизъявление было свободным и легитимным, в полном соответствии с новыми принципами международного права. Это подтвердили более сотни международных наблюдателей, в том числе из западных стран. Доминирует подобное восприятие и среди пользователей интернета. Результаты стихийных опросов, проведенных в Твиттере, показывают, что большинство респондентов считают необходимым уважать права жителей этих регионов определять свое будущее. Не согласны с этим прежде всего Киев и его западные спонсоры, покрывавшие преступления майданной власти все эти 8,5 лет. Те, кто сегодня громче всех клеймит нелегитимность референдума, ссылаясь на отсутствие согласия наркокиевского режима, занимали ровно противоположную позицию, когда высказывались в Международном суде в поддержку отделения Косово от Сербии. Отделение без всяких референдумов, не знаем, оказались так же близки к правде, как и проверка в руках госсекретаря США Колина Пауэлла, которого тряс в зале Совета Безопасности,
glass vial
held by
Colin Powell in Security Council when he
Цинизм
was talking
ситуации
about weapons of
состоит
mass
еще и в том, что
destruction in
те, кто
Iraq.
сегодня
The
заламывает
cynicism
руки,
here consists
крича якобы
also
имеющих
of the
место
fact
нарушение
today
устава
that
ООН со
those
стороны
who are
России.
screaming
Много лет
about
об
the
этом документе не
UN Charter being violated by
вспоминали, как и о
Russia
международном
did
праве в целом,
not remember
пытаясь
this document
подменить
for
его
many
порядком,
years,
основанным на
trying
правилах.
to replace us with
В отличие от ситуации с Косово,
with the rules-based
права и
order.
сами жизни народов
Unlike the situation in
ДНР,
Kosovo,
ЛНР,
the rights
Херсонщины
and
и
the lives
Запорожья
of people
сегодня
in
действительно
DNR, Eleanor,
находятся под
Kherson, and
угрозой.
Zaporozhye are indeed being
Дать им
threatened today.
защиту,
They
дать им
need
определенность в их
protecting
будущем
them, giving them
мог только
certainty
четкий
in
юридический
their
статус
future
этих
can
регионов
only be
и
done
вхождение
through
в
a
состав
very
Российской
clear
Федерации.
legal status of those regions and accession
Так
to
же,
the
как
Russian
в
Federation.
2014 году
As
мы
was the
спасли
case in
жителей Крыма,
2014,
которым
we
Киев
saved the
недвусмысленно
people
угрожал
in the Crimea
украинизацией или
who were
расправой.
threatened with Ukrainizations
Именно
and
поэтому
reprisals
мы
by
пошли на
Kiev.
этот шаг,
That is why we
осознавая,
undertook
какую
that step.
ярость
We
он вызовет у наших
understood
оппонентов.
how outraged our opponents will be by
Сегодня
it.
же угрозы
And today,
украинских
the
националистов
threat
выглядят еще
from
серьезнее.
the Ukrainian
В
nationalists is
условиях
even
подпитки киевского
serious.
режима все
The
новыми
Kiev
поставками
regime
западных
is being
вооружений,
supplied with
добивающих
Western
те
weapons
мирные кварталы,
every
до которых
day,
раньше
and
ВСУ не
they
доставали.
keep using them against
На
those
настроениях
residential
на
areas
референдум
which never used
сказался
to be
развязанный Киевом
reached
откровенный
by
террор
the
в отношении
Ukrainian armed
гражданского
forces. There
населения,
is also
которое
terror,
киевский
open
режим
terror against the
объявил
civilians
коллаборационистами.
by the Ukrainian
В
regime
этом
against those
сами
whom they
киевские
call
боевики не
collaborationists.
стесняются
The
признаваться
Kiev
западным СМИ.
fighters are openly
Бахвалят,
admitting
что
this
они,
to the Western mass
цитирую,
media, and they boast
отстреливают
and gloat,
российских
saying
коллаборантов
that they are
как свиней.
shooting
Конец
Russian
цитаты.
collaborators as though they
Это
were
отнюдь не
pigs.
метафора,
End of quote. This is not a
как
metaphor.
свидетельствует ролик, выложенный
As was
украинским
shown
неонацистом,
in a
экс-командиром
video
неонацистского батальона
by
Азов
the former
Жориным, где
commander
связанных
of the Azov
мирных
battalion,
жителей
Zhorin.
в Купянске расстреливают и сбрасывают в яму.
Kupiansk people
А вы
are being
слышали об ударе
executed and thrown
ВСУ
into
по
pits.
очереди людей,
Have you
направлявшихся на
heard about the
контролируемую Россией
Ukrainian
территорию
armed forces
Запорожской
against
области?
a
Удар, об
strike
ударе, который в духе доктора Геббельса украинские
which was
лжецы приписали
similarly
России,
to Dr.
как и удары по
Goebbels
Запорожской АЭС и городу Энергодар.
was assigned
За
to
украинскими
the
нацистами тянется
Russian
шлейф
forces.
кровавых
The
провокаций
Ukrainian
в Буче,
nationalists have
с Бучи,
behind them a
Ирпеня,
wake,
других
a
районах,
trail of
откуда в
provocations in
апреле
Irpin and
российские войска
Bucha,
ушли еще
where
в качестве жеста доброй воли.
in April Russian
теперь
forces
еще и
left
из
as
Изюма,
a
где
goodwill
Киев
gesture.
попытался
And
разыграть
from Izum now,
сценарий
where
Бучи.
Kiev is trying
Однако от чьих рук
play
на
out
самом деле на
the
юге и
same
востоке
scenario.
Украины гибли и гибнут мирные
In the
жители,
east and the south of
населению
Ukraine,
Донбасса, Запорожья
peaceful
и
civilians
Херсонщины
are
прекрасно известно.
dying, and the people
Отсюда
in
однозначный
Kherson
выбор в пользу
and
будущего с
Zaporozhye
Россией,
know that
который мы
very
намерены
well.
уважать.
And that's why they
Призываем
decided to
уважать
opt
и
for the future with
Уважаемые
Russia.
коллеги,
And I call
мы
upon you to
призываем
respect their
международное
choice.
сообщество
Distinguished
обратить
colleagues, we
внимание
call on
не
the
только на
international
эти
community
преступные
to pay
деяния,
attention not just
но
to
и
the
на
criminal
безответственные
acts,
шаги
but
и
also to the
заявления
responsible
киевского режима,
steps made by the
которые
Kiev
призваны
regime.
напрямую
These
вовлечь
steps
военные
are
действия против России
trying
страны
to in order to act against Russia, to involve the countries of NATO into that. The appeals by Zelensky to deliver a preventive nuclear strike against Russia. Clearly, Kiev expecting that if this happens, that they will avoid the inevitable defeat on the battlefield and avoid responsibility for their crimes. But what these appeals are threatening all of us with World War III and nuclear disaster. The evidence of what the Kiev regime can do is a sabotage of the Crimea Bridge. We warned that this will not be conducted with impunity. When you do these acts of sabotage, when you kill those who are unfavorable to you, the Kiev regime is on the same level with the most outrageous terrorist organizations. Only it's that the Kiev regime and the Western backers who are trying to make sure that there is war until the very last Ukrainian bear responsibility for that. Distinguished colleagues, I would like to underscore yet once again that Russia acts in applicability of the UN principles, including the principle of territorial integrity of states. But this cannot be considered separately from other principles, and first and foremost the principle of equality and self-determination of people. The declaration on the principles of international law, on friendly relations and cooperation among states, in line with the UN Charter, which was passed by the General Assembly in 1970, to which the sponsors of the resolutions refer, quoting it selectively, states very clearly that territorial integrity applies to those states which in their acts abide by the principle of equality and self-determination of people, and who therefore have governments which represent the entire people living in that territory. The Kiev regime is devoid of this legitimacy on the part of the Russian-speaking people in Ukraine in 2014 already, after the Maidan coup. And for 8 years, we have been providing thousands of pieces of evidence of its crimes against their own people, of how they impeded on the rights and violated the rights of the Russian-speaking people of Ukraine, or at least 40% of that country, of their attempts to forcibly Ukrainize them. These are inconvenient facts. They're not in line with the unilateral Western narrative that's being imposed on you, at the same time twisting the arms of those who have their own opinions, separate from the Western viewpoint. Those who managed to withstand this unprecedented pressure proved that they have their own opinion and are conducting a policy which is truly independent. They are the ones who abide by the most important principle of the sovereign equality of member states, and that they speak on equal terms with others rather than a hegemon. It is a growth of such a state, the number of such states that our Western opponents are most afraid of and are doing everything to prevent us. Mr. President, since you didn't enable us to do this in normal rules when we asked for it, we demand that our proposal to suspend the rule of procedure number 87 as a whole be put to the vote, including its agenda item B, and that this be done now. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. Federation to clarify exactly what Russia would like to put in motion.
Господин председатель, мы
Mr.
предлагаем
President, our proposal is
приостановить действие
that we
статьи 87
suspend
правил процедуры
Rule
Генеральной
87
Ассамблеи
of the Rules of Procedure
с тем,
of the
чтобы
General
провести голосование по
Assembly so as to
представленному
conduct
проекту
the vote
резолюции
on
секретным
the
голосованием.
draft resolution through secret ballot.
Ladies and gentlemen, the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation has moved that Rule 87 be suspended in order to take a decision on draft resolution A/ES 11L5 by secret ballot. This would constitute the reconsideration of the decision taken by the General Assembly to adopt the motion submitted by Albania. I wish to recall Rule 81 of the Rules of Procedure. Rule 81 provides as follows. When a proposal has been adopted to rejected, it may not be reconsidered at the same session unless the General Assembly, by a 2/3 majority of the members present and voting, so decides. Permission to speak on a motion to reconsider shall be accorded only to 2 speakers opposing the motion, after which it shall be immediately put to vote. Pursuant to Rule 81 of the Rules of Procedure, up to 2 speakers opposing the motion by the Russian Federation for reconsideration may make statements. Does any delegation opposing the motion by the Russian Federation wish to take the floor?
Russia is not opposing to it, so Albania and Ukraine.
I recognize the delegation of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm taking the floor to object to the request from the Russian Federation to hold the motion on this issue. As we already said, we made the decision. It's already made, and we don't see any reason to revisit this decision. The motion was approved with 107 votes and the clearly applicable rules of procedure on voting. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Albania. Now I recognize the distinguished representative of Ukraine.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. I believe it is a clear case of abuse by one delegation of the General Assembly, manipulation with the rules of procedure. I think that the wish of the General Assembly was overwhelming. So we call on the Russian delegation to stop putting hurdles on the way of the General Assembly to carry on the decision after a very important debate that we have in front of us. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ukraine. And before going to vote, I recognize that the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation wants to speak on the point of order.
Абсолютно верно, господин председатель. Я действительно хочу высказаться по порядку ведения заседания. Мы не согласны с тем рулингом, который вы сейчас озвучили. В нашей ситуации статья 80 Албании было голосовать по резолюции в соответствии с пунктом 87б правил процедуры. И туда же был искусственно привязан никем не поставленный вопрос
there was an artificial link to the secret ballot, whereas what we are proposing is that Rule 87 be suspended as a whole. These are 2 different proposals, not linked between themselves. And Article 71 of the Rules of Procedure is the one that applies to our proposal. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. Ladies and gentlemen, the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation has challenged the President's ruling that this is a reconsideration of the decision just taken. Rule 71 is applicable in this case, and the relevant parts of this rule states as follows. I quote, "A representative may appeal against the ruling of the President. The appeal shall be immediately put to the vote, and the President's ruling shall stand unless overruled by a majority of the members present and voting." Thus, I shall now put to a recorded vote the appeal that is a challenge against the President's ruling. May I point out that those who vote yes will be voting in favor of the challenge submitted by the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of the challenge by the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation against the President's ruling that this is a reconsideration of the decision just taken, please signify. Those against and abstention.
The General Assembly is now voting on the challenge made by the representative of the Russian Federation. Those agreeing with the challenge made by the Russian Federation should press yes. Those disagreeing with the challenge by the Russian Federation should vote no. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor of the appeal, 14. Against, 100. Abstention, 38. The ruling of the President is upheld. Ladies and gentlemen, since the President's ruling is upheld, the General Assembly will now vote on the motion to reconsider the decision adopted by the General Assembly. Those in favor of reconsidering the decision should vote yes. Those that are not in favor of reconsidering the motion should vote no.
The General Assembly is now voting on the motion to reconsider the decision adopted earlier by the General Assembly. Those in favor of the reconsideration of the decision already taken earlier by the Assembly should vote yes. And those against such reconsideration should vote no. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the voting is as follows. In favor, 16, against 104, abstention 34. The General Assembly has thus decided not to reconsider the motion. And now I give the floor I recognize the Russian Federation willing to take the floor on point of order.
Совершенно верно, господин председатель. У нас будет еще возможность прокомментировать порядок ведения этого заседания. Не буду сейчас уделять этому времени,
I'm not going to spend more time on that. We've addressed this partially, but I wanted to say something else, and it is this. We are convinced that we need to move on to making a decision on the draft resolution. I'm extending this over several days, and we have a very long list of speakers.
Определение процедуры голосования и непосредственно принятие решения по проекту резолюции
voting and then a decision on the resolution is a highly illogical step. Such an approach would give additional opportunity to exert targeted pressure on those countries who had supported the secret ballot against the Western wishes, and the Assembly should not go along with those who should be twisting people's arms. Therefore, we propose, and this is an official motion, that we vote on the draft resolution now and not after we listen to all the speakers. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. May I ask the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation to clarify whether it has requested to close the debate under Rule 75 in order to proceed immediately to action on the draft resolution.
Господин председатель, вы неправильно нас поняли. Мы хотим, чтобы вы объявили голосование по проекту резолюции сейчас, вы его проголосовали, а затем продолжили дебаты.
think I understood the point of the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation, and I intend to conduct the proceeding of this meeting in accordance with the rules of procedure of the General Assembly and the past practices of its emergency special sessions. And the practice of the General Assembly, including the emergency special session, to proceed with the debate and then come to the action on the draft resolution. I recognize the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation willing to take the floor on point of order.
We are in admiration of your courageous decision, Mr. President. We'd like to find out the following. The practice of the General Assembly, have there been instances where the decisions on the rule of procedure, including voting, were taking place at the beginning of the debate, and then the voting took place at the end of the debate, according to what you've just said? We cannot agree with the approach that you just put forward. It's illogical and inconsistent. Voting on a decision basically means that the Assembly moves over to the consideration of the draft resolution. Instead of doing that, we're going to have to wait possibly several days, possibly until Thursday. And it's only then that we will be able to vote on the resolution. And we do know who benefits from such a scenario, Mr. President. And it's unfortunate that you're playing into those hats. But unfortunately, the only thing left to us at this stage is to express our regret at the decision that you made. And this also goes to all of the ways of conducting the proceedings. We regret them, all of the ways of conducting the proceedings that you have demonstrated today.
I hear the opinion of the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation, and his opinion will be duly reflected in the records of the meeting. Now we proceed with the...
Mr. President, honorable colleagues, I have the honor to speak on behalf of 8 Nordic Baltic countries: Estonia, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Lithuania, Norway, Sweden, and my own country, Latvia. Mr. President, February 24th this year, Russia launched its brutal, full-scale invasion of Ukraine in blatant violation of international law and the UN Charter. By this war of aggression, aided by Belarus, Russia has deliberately violated the fundamental rights of all states to independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Russia's military aggression and systematic violations of international humanitarian law and human rights, and atrocities committed against the people of Ukraine constitute to cause grave human rights suffering in Ukraine as well as globally. Moreover, Russia has chosen further escalation with resolutely missile attacks on residential areas, power stations, railways, trade centers and bridges in Kiev, Zaporizhia, Lviv, Dnipro, and other Ukrainian cities launched by Russia. There is no military purpose there. The only goal of Russia's deliberate attacks is to cause death and destruction to civilian people. With its military force, Russia has organized sham referenda as a pretext for a subsequent illegal attempt to annex 4 Ukrainian regions: Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, following the pattern of the attempted illegal annexation of Crimea, Ukraine, in 2014. We reiterate our unwavering support to Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. The unlawful Russian attempts to change the status of the temporarily occupied Ukrainian regions have no legal validity. We will never recognize the so-called results and claimed consequences of these sham referenda. Russia's faulted attempts to validate voting at gunpoint goes against the core principles of international law, as also reiterated by the Secretary General on September 29, 2022. They are null and void and cannot produce any legal effect whatsoever. Mr. President, there is no such thing as legitimate referendum amidst brutal warfare and widespread and systematic violations of international humanitarian law, human rights violations and abuses. There is no such thing as a valid annexation of a state's territory by another state as a result of threats and direct use of force. In this respect, we recall that, under international law, all states are obliged not to recognize Russia's attempted illegal annexation of Ukrainian territory. Colleagues, Russia's unlawful war in Ukraine constitutes a direct attack on the rules-based international system and a threat to international peace and security. We will not accept this blatant violation of the core principles of the UN Charter and the suffering of millions in its wake. We will not accept Russia's unlawful behavior that jeopardizes international peace and security. We reject Russia's brutality in the strongest possible terms, and the international community will hold Russia accountable for its actions. There shall be no impunity. On Friday, September 30th, the Security Council draft resolution on the sham referenda failed to be adopted due to a single member, Russia's casting its veto. We deeply regret this. We do, however, acknowledge the special report of the Security Council on the use of the veto, which informs us on discussions today. Mr. President, our stance is clear. A world without respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the rules-based international order cannot stand. Therefore, we must firmly and collectively reject Russia's claim, sham referenda, and illegal attempt to annex any part of Ukrainian territory. We must collectively continue to insist that Russia completely and unilaterally withdraw its troops from the territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Russia must comply with the 16th of March order of the ICJ, which is binding on the parties, and stop its aggression against Ukraine. We must uphold the core principles of international law and the UN Charter, and we must underline that Russia's unacceptable threats on the use of nuclear weapons is in clear threatens international peace and security. Colleagues, we will continue to firmly stand with Ukraine, and we will continue to provide support to Ukraine for as long as it takes. In line with the UN Charter and international law, Ukraine has the inherent right to defend itself against Russia's aggression and to restore its sovereignty within internationally recognized borders. We know what the annexation and occupation are. We have experienced it during and after the Second World War. Therefore, we must do everything possible to defend the UN Charter. The Nordic and Baltic countries will therefore vote in favor of this resolution, and we call on all member states to do the same. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Latvia. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Fiji, speaking on behalf of the Pacific Island Forum.
Mr. President, Excellencies, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of member states of the Pacific Island Forum with presence here at the United Nations. This is the third time our forum members have addressed an emergency special session of this distinguished assembly regarding the ongoing illegal invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation. We spoke out to condemn the invasion. We spoke humanitarian access. Today, we are here again to speak in defense of Ukraine's territorial sovereignty and integrity in light of Russian Federation's attempt to illegally annex 4 regions of eastern Ukraine, namely Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. Mr. President, many islands and countries of our blue Pacific continent are diverse with their own unique histories. However, there is much which unites us, including values of justice, fairness, and shared prosperity. Underpinning this unity is a shared belief in the value of the multilateral system enshrined in the UN Charter and its principles. The Russian Federation's attempted illegal annexation of parts of Ukrainian territory is a clear violation of the principles of the UN Charter and of international law. The Charter cannot simply be worn like a prestigious cloak only to be discarded when perceived geopolitical interests are at stake. Every instance of such behavior risks wearing it thin, dirtying it, and potentially even destroying it. Like our very air, water, and land, the Charter must be treasured if it is to, in turn, provide sustenance to our global family. The many states of the blue Pacific continent understand this intimately. We also understand the terrible human and environmental cost of nuclear weapons in light of our region's history regarding nuclear testing. It is unacceptable that the use of nuclear weapons is openly threatened by a nuclear weapon state. We therefore strongly condemn Russia's latest threats to use nuclear weapons against Ukraine. We also strongly support international efforts to safeguard Ukrainian nuclear facilities against damage, intentional or otherwise. Mr. President, as a member of the Security Council, the Russian Federation has an even greater responsibility to uphold the Charter, the principles of sovereignty, dignity, and peaceful resolutions of all disputes. Our Pacific Islands Forum family thus calls for the Russian Federation to cease its attempted illegal annexation of Ukrainian territory, to de-escalate the current situation, and to withdraw behind its internationally recognized borders in order for a peaceful resolution to the conflict to be achieved. Such a resolution will not be found through coercion, violence, torture, bullets, and bombs. It will come through diplomacy, justice, and respect for the values, rules, and norms which sustain our global community and which animate these hollowed holes. From climate change to COVID recovery, hunger, and irretractable conflicts, there's simply too much at stake for this needless, illegal war to continue to undermine our shared work. You have the full statement, Mr. President. I thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Fiji, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union speaking on behalf of its member states.
Thank you, President. Before delivering this statement, allow me to say how appalled we are by the attacks carried out today by Russia against Kiev and other cities across Ukraine. Such indiscriminate attacks on civilians are war crimes, and we are committed to holding the perpetrators to account. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the EU and its member states, the candidate countries North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, and the Republic of Moldova, the country of the Stabilization Association process and potential candidate Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Georgia, Andorra, Monaco, and San Marino, align themselves with this statement. We welcome the decision to reconvene this emergency special session. The past week, the European Union has facilitated a resolution to condemn Russia's organization of the illegal so-called referenda in regions within Ukraine's internationally recognized borders, as well as its subsequent attempted illegal annexation of Ukraine's regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. We want to sincerely thank all the delegations that engaged with us on this text. During a transparent and inclusive process, we have made every effort to include the proposals we have received from other delegations. We believe the result is a concise and focused text that all of us should be able to support. We therefore strongly encourage all UN member states to co-sponsor and vote in favor of the resolution. And in this respect, let me say that we are very grateful that this Assembly has decided to follow its long-established tradition of voting in a transparent manner. President, dear colleagues, this debate concerns every single one of us. Today's discussion is about upholding the Charter of the United Nations and the core principles of our organization. It is about respecting the most basic principles of international law. By willfully undermining the rules-based international order and blatantly and repeatedly violating Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, Russia is putting global peace and security at risk. If we do not condemn the actions of the Russian Federation in Ukraine today, we will end up condoning similar blatant attacks on any and all of our countries tomorrow. We therefore firmly reject and unequivocally condemn the attempted illegal annexation by Russia of Ukraine's Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions. Acquisition of territory through the use of force is a matter of concern for all of us. Protecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all UN member states, regardless of their size and their power, is our collective duty and a core principle of the UN Charter. President, we do not and will never recognize the illegal so-called referenda that Russia has engineered as a pretext for this further violation of Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, nor their falsified and illegal results. We will never recognize this attempted illegal annexation. These decisions are null and void and cannot produce legal effects under international law. Crimea, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk are Ukraine. We call on all states and international organizations to unequivocally reject this attempted illegal annexation. Dear colleagues, the title of the resolution we're discussing today is Territorial Integrity of Ukraine, Defending the Principles of the Charter of the United Nations. That is the only thing we are voting on, and I strongly encourage all member states to stand up for the Charter. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Mr. President, we thank you for convening yet another historic emergency special session of the General Assembly. A session that was called because of a war that must cease immediately. A session that was called because the Security Council failed once again to fulfill its primary responsibility. Mr. President, while the whole world is calling for an end to the war, we woke up once again to shocking news this morning. The attacks by Russia against several cities of Ukraine that resulted in civilian casualties today are deeply worrying and unacceptable. In the face of these news, we reiterate once again our strong support to Ukraine's territorial integrity, independence, and sovereignty. Mr. President, we also unequivocally reject the illegitimate referenda. Russia's decision to annex the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions of Ukraine is illegal. It constitutes a grave violation of international law. It cannot be accepted. It has been 8 years since the illegal annexation of Crimea. Since 2014, the human rights situation in the Crimean Peninsula has severely deteriorated. In particular, the human rights of the Crimean Tatars have been systematically targeted. The annexation of Crimea led to nothing but further damage, escalation, and instability in the region. It's not going to be different this time. The decision to annex Ukrainian territory will only serve to further jeopardize the prospects for peace. We call upon the Russian Federation to reverse its decision and to return to diplomacy. Mr. President, we all need the international law and a global order based on rules. It is our duty as member states to defend legality. It is our obligation to ensure that conflicts are resolved through peaceful means. We must collectively ensure that the founding principles of the UN, enshrined in its charter, are upheld. This is the only way to save ourselves from the scourge of war. With this understanding, Turkey sponsored the draft resolution that will be put to vote this week. Mr. President, let me make it clear once again. We do not need, nor do we want, war in our region. This war should not have started. It should stop now. It should be brought to an end through negotiations. Together with the United Nations Secretary General, we helped the parties to reach a common understanding on the Grain Corridor initiative. We can do more. As a neighbor to both parties, we call on them once again and reiterate our readiness to support and facilitate a peace process to end this war. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Turkey. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore.
Mr. President, it has been more than 7 months since the Russian Federation, a permanent member of the Security Council, launched its invasion of Ukraine, an independent and sovereign nation and a member of the United Nations. Singapore has taken a consistent position on the need to respect the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of all countries. The unjustified invasion of Ukraine by Russia is a flagrant violation of international law and the UN Charter. On the 1st of March this year, the General Assembly adopted a resolution with the support of an overwhelming majority of countries to reaffirm its commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine. The resolution we adopted in March also demanded that Russia must immediately cease its use of force against Ukraine and unconditionally withdraw all of its military forces from the territory of Ukraine. We are deeply disappointed and extremely concerned that after 7 months, the war in Ukraine continues unabated. In fact, the war is escalating with mounting casualties. Russia's recent decision to organize referenda in 4 regions and its decision subsequently to annex these 4 regions within Ukraine's internationally recognized borders is a further escalation of the conflict. It is also a clear violation of international law and the principles of the UN Charter. The indiscriminate attacks launched by Russia last night on civilians across Ukraine is also clearly unacceptable. We entirely support and endorse the views of the UN Secretary General when he said that the annexation of a state's territory by another state resulting from the threat or use of force is a violation of the principles of the UN Charter and of international law. The Secretary General added that any decision to proceed with the annexation of the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions of Ukraine would have no legal value and deserves to be condemned. Mr. President, Singapore would like to reiterate its position that the sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of all countries must be respected. The rules-based multilateral system is built on respect for international law and respect for the principles of the UN Charter. For small states like Singapore, the principles of the UN Charter and international law are not matters of academic debate. They are a matter of life and death. And a system based on the idea that might is right is simply unacceptable. Singapore has question that has been placed before the General Assembly, and we will support its adoption by voting yes, and we will do so as a matter of principle. We believe it is important for the General Assembly to adopt this resolution by a clear majority and to send a clear signal to the world that international law must be respected, sovereignty must to vote in support of the resolution that has been placed before us today in the interest of upholding international law, upholding the principles of the UN Charter, and in the interest of upholding the rules-based multilateral system. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Singapore. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Costa Rica.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President,
existe una razón por la que nos reunimos en este momento en la Asamblea General y no en el Consejo de Administración Fiduciaria. Los estados ya no pueden ocupar otros estados. La prohibición de la agresión y la prohibición de la anexión forzosa de un territorio son normas vedadas del derecho internacional. Y la farsa de los referendos del 30 de septiembre no cambia el estatus de ningún territorio ucraniano, el derecho a la libre determinación de los pueblos, consagrado en la Declaración Universal de los Derechos Humanos y la Resolución 1514, es inalienable y es base fundamental de la existencia de este organismo. Seamos claros, Donetsk es Ucrania, Luhansk es Ucrania, Kherson, Zaporizhia y Crimea son Ucrania. Ser cómplice de estas violaciones es en sí mismo un crimen internacional. Ucrania es un Estado propio, con su propio pueblo y su propio gobierno elegido democráticamente. Costa Rica condena de la manera más enérgica los bombardeos que asolaron las comunidades ucranianas en todo el país este fin de semana. A lo largo de la invasión a Ucrania, estos bombardeos tipifican el continuo y completo desprecio por los derechos humanos, el derecho humanitario y las normas internacionales. Por ello, en este momento, a lo que más debemos temer como comunidad internacional es al poder con impunidad. Pero no solo debemos temerlo, sino que debemos vencerlo con valentía. Impunidad para incumplir con el derecho internacional. Impunidad para confiar en el poderío militar. Impunidad es también la incapacidad de enfrentar la dolorosa e injusta verdad de esta guerra. Lo
of
vemos
this
en la
war.
forma en que se ha
We see this
restringido
in the
gravemente
way
los derechos
media
de los
rights
medios
and
de
the freedom of
comunicación
speech
y la libertad
have
de
been
expresión
severely
desde la
curtailed
invasión a
since the
Ucrania.
beginning of the invasion of
Periodistas y
Ukraine.
trabajadores de medios
Journalists
de
and media
comunicación han
workers
sido
have
asesinados,
been killed
heridos,
and injured,
incapaces de realizar su
rendered
trabajo
unable to carry
esencial
out their essential
debido a las
work due to
continuas
ongoing
hostilidades,
hostilities, to
desplazamientos y
displacement and
amenazas.
threats.
Se han bloqueado medios de
Media outlets have
comunicación
been
y
blocked,
se ha censurado la
and
libertad de
free
expresión.
communication and the freedom
Los
of
periodistas
expression
y los
has been
trabajadores
censored.
de los medios de
Journalists and
comunicación
media
son los
workers
ojos
are
y los
the
oídos
eyes and
desde
the
el terreno
ears
para
on the
que
ground
podamos
that allow us to
mantener un
have
debate
a
significativo aquí
meaningful
en Nueva
debate
York.
here in New York.
Su libertad de opinión y de
Their freedom of
expresión es
opinion and
preciada
expression
y
is
debe ser
precious and
preservada.
must be preserved.
Por supuesto,
Of
la
course,
libertad de expresión no es el
freedom of
único derecho
expression is
humano
not
bajo
the only
violación en el
human right
marco de esta
to
agresión.
fall victim
Los
of this
recientes
aggression.
informes de la
The
misión de
recent reports
observación
of the
de los
UN
derechos
Human
humanos
Rights
de la ONU
Monitoring
en
Mission in
Ucrania
Ukraine
documentan la muerte de
document
civiles,
thousands of
la
civilian
destrucción
deaths, as well
masiva de
as the mass
infraestructura
destruction
civil,
of civilian
las ejecuciones
infrastructure,
sumarias, las
summary
desapariciones
executions,
forzadas,
enforced
la
disappearances,
tortura, la
torture,
violencia sexual.
sexual violence.
Existen
There
muchas más
are
ofensas
many more
que enumerar,
offences
pero
that can
en
be
este
listed,
momento
but
son
at this
demasiadas
time,
para
there are
contarlas.
just too many to count.
En el
In
2022 no
2022,
deberíamos
we
tener
should
que
not
explicar
have
que
to
las
explain
prohibiciones de la
that the
tortura,
prohibitions
la
of torture,
privación
the
arbitraria de la
arbitrary
vida y
deprivation
la
of life,
violencia
and of sexual
sexual
violence
son
are
absolutas.
absolute in nature.
Costa Rica llama a
Costa
todas
Rica
las
calls
partes,
upon all
sin
parties,
importar la
no
afiliación,
matter
a
their
cumplir con el
affiliations,
derecho
to
internacional.
comply with
Las
international law.
violaciones de los
Human
derechos humanos
rights
nunca
violations
deben ser
must
medios
never
políticos
be
para
used
alcanzar
as
un fin.
political means to
Y
an
cuando
end.
se tratan
And
como
when they
tales,
are used
deben
as
ser
such, they must be
documentados
documented,
y sus
and the
autores deben
perpetrators
rendir
must
cuentas.
be held
Por
accountable.
esta razón,
For this
Costa
reason,
Rica
Costa
subraya su
Rica
apoyo
stresses
a la
its
investigación
support
de la
for
Corte Penal
the
Internacional sobre
investigation
los
being
crímenes de
conducted
guerra
by the
en Ucrania.
ICC of
La
war crimes
amenaza de
in
infligir
Ukraine.
fuerza nuclear
Threatening to inflict
tipifica
nuclear
esta
force
impunidad.
typifies the impunity
Resulta
to
aún
which I
más
referred.
indignante que
It
se
is all the
amenace con
more
el uso de armas
outrageous that the
nucleares
use of
para
nuclear weapons
intentar debilitar
is
la resistencia a
threatened
esta
in an
brutal
attempt to
invasión.
weaken resistance to this
Amenazar
brutal
con el uso de armas
invasion.
nucleares
Threatening to use
también es
nuclear
ilegal.
weapons is also
Los
illegal.
artículos 2.4
Articles
y 2.3 de la
and
Carta de las
2.3
Naciones
of the
Unidas
UN Charter
prohíben la
prohibit
amenaza de la
the
fuerza
threat
nuclear
of
y el
use of
uso
nuclear
de la
force
fuerza en
and the use
general.
of force in general.
Durante años hemos
years,
pedido que se
we have
reduzcan los
called for the
arsenales
reduction
nucleares
of
y
nuclear
que se
stockpiles
cumpla con el
and for full
TNP.
compliance with the
Estos
NPT.
llamados han
These
caído en
calls
oídos
have
sordos.
fallen on deaf ears.
Las armas
Nuclear
nucleares no son
weapons are not
abstracciones,
abstract concepts.
son
They are
amenazas
concrete
concretas
threats
para
against
todos
all of
nosotros.
us.
Los ucranianos
The Ukrainians
acurrucados en los
huddled in
refugios
bomb shelters
antibombas
and
y en las
subway
estaciones del
stations
metro lo saben
know
muy
this
bien.
all too well.
¿Cuándo lo
When
sabremos
will the
nosotros?
rest of us understand
Instamos
this
por ende a
fact?
la Federación de Rusia que abandone
Consequently,
el
we
chantaje
urge the Russian
nuclear y
Federation
cumpla
to
con sus
put an end
obligaciones
to nuclear blackmail
en
and to
virtud
abide by
del
its
derecho
obligations
internacional.
under international
Señor
law.
Presidente,
Mr. President,
todas las guerras
all wars
son guerras
are
perdidas.
wars lost.
Costa Rica hace un llamado a
Costa
los
Rica
estados
calls
para
on
que
states
no solo
to
rechacen
not
o
only reject
desconozcan estas supuestas anexiones,
not
sino
to
que
recognize
cooperen
these
para
supposed
ponerles fin.
annexations. Rather, we call upon all
Requerimos
states
la
to cooperate to
prevalencia
bring
del
them to an
derecho
end.
sobre la
We demand
fuerza,
the prevalence
la
of law over
ausencia de
force,
impunidad
the
y la
absence of
solución de los
impunity,
conflictos
and
por
a
medios
peaceful and
pacíficos y
negotiated
negociados.
solution.
Exigimos
We
también
also
el cumplimiento
demand
del derecho
compliance
internacional,
with international
el
law,
respeto a los
respect
derechos
for
humanos
human
y de la
rights,
Carta
and
de
the
las
United
Naciones
Nations
Unidas,
Charter.
pues son la
For
única
this
manera
compliance
de
and these
resolver
documents
nuestros
are the
problemas.
only way to resolve our
Es hora
problems.
de
It is
renunciar
time
a la
to
agresión a
relinquish
Ucrania.
the aggression against Ukraine. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Costa Rica, and now I give the floor to the the distinguished representative of Poland.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, colleagues. Today, since early morning, we have been further from a peaceful solution to the war in Ukraine. Massive Russian strikes against civilian infrastructure in multiple Ukrainian locations justified by the spiteful Kremlin regime rhetoric of revenge, constitutes yet another grim chapter of escalation caused by the aggressor. We cannot remain indifferent to these unacceptable acts of terrorist nature. Mr. President, the Charter of the United Nations once again desperately needs our defense. This is why, one by one, big and small, we are taking the floor today, strongly declaring our commitment to the Charter's values. This is why we are reiterating our support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. This is why we are condemning the latest blatant violation of the very core principle of international order is based on. The Polish position is clear. Sham referenda are evidently illegal. They cannot produce any legal effect, and they cannot lead into any binding action. A single vote in Security Council over a week ago managed to obscure this reality. Fortunately, in this chamber, there is no veto right. All members are equal and have identical power of one vote. Let us make a good use of it, even more so when the Russian Federation tried a moment ago to deprive us all from the freedom of speech and expression before the vote. Mr. President, in principle, the upcoming vote on the draft resolution presented by Ukraine should be indisputable, a strong and resounding yes. The states which do not recognize the independence of the so-called Donbas People's Republic should not recognize their attempted illegal incorporation to Russia. The former was just a pretext to accomplish the latter. Such behavior is a clear proof of the policy of the fait accompli pursued by the Russian occupiers and their proxies, both in the past and in the present. Not condemning the attempted annexation means weakening the UN Charter and weakening the whole UN system. One cannot expect UN institutions to function efficiently if one votes not accordingly to the very foundation they were established upon. Those who undermine the Charter cannot at the same time expect that the UN system will deliver in the fields of such as peacekeeping, development, aid, or humanitarian assistance, just to name the few. On the other hand, voting in favor of the proposed resolution is a much desired sign of solidarity. Solidarity not only with Ukraine, but with all those who can share the same fate in the future. To us, Poland, this is a very embodiment of the UN Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Mr. President, therefore Poland once again calls to all member states to demonstrate their determination in defending the basic principles of international order. Let us reaffirm our enduring support for the territorial integrity of Ukraine, its sovereignty and independence. Dear delegates, the non-recognition of the Russian policy of the fait accompli is a precondition for diplomacy to work and peace talks to begin. And just peace is all what we desire. So let's reject the attempted illegal annexation and give peace a chance. Let's demonstrate that we stand by the UN Charter. Let's close ranks and vote yes. Yes for the UN system, yes for the international solidarity. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Poland, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Mr. President, respect and adherence to international law, sovereignty, and territorial integrity are fundamental and a principled position for Indonesia. It is crystal clear for us that the settlement of disputes between countries must and can only be resolved through peaceful means in accordance to international law. Only genuine dialogue can bring lasting solution. war brings us nowhere. The war in Ukraine is evident that only death, destructions, and human miseries are winning. Events in the last few hours and days further confirms this. Therefore, we reiterate our call to stop the war. While we welcome the efforts of the Secretary General and of some countries to bring the parties to dialogue and to the negotiating table, the international community must work harder to ensure that peace prevails. We have to aggressively wage peace. Peace must be our ultimate aim and priority. Mr. President, as the war in Ukraine persists and its response takes hold, the number of casualties and refugees continues to surge. Moreover, the war has also caused far-reaching consequences. Billions of people, particularly the poor around the world, have become unintended victims of the war. Increasing costs of grain and fertilizer perpetuated by the war contribute to the worsening of global food, energy, and financial crisis. The Secretary General has referred to this as a one-in-a-generation global cost of living crisis, in which developing countries are disproportionately affected. It is not too late for us to choose an alternate path. Ending the war is the only way to save lives and to ease the suffering of innocents around the world. The unity of the General Assembly is needed more than ever in addressing the wider humanitarian impact of this war. Mr. President, the referendum of 4 regions in Ukraine not only violates the principle of the UN Charter and international law, it also further complicates effort to peacefully resolve the conflict. As the highest decision-making body of the United Nations, the General Assembly must resolutely demonstrate its political leadership, including in the outcomes and resolution it produces. We must ensure that the General Assembly do not only represent the political aspiration of the few. We must also avoid a take-it-or-leave-it approach. We therefore deeply regret that inputs calling to stop the war and for the immediate and peaceful resolution of conflicts in Ukraine failed to be reflected in the final draft of today's resolution. We remain convinced that lasting peace can only be achieved on the negotiating table. We should not let efforts to finding peaceful solution be held back by divisions and distrust. Indonesia stands ready to engage constructively, including through promoting conducive environment for peace. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malta.
Mr. President, Malta fully supports the resumption of this emergency special session following the use of the veto by the Russian Federation on 30th September. Malta aligns herself with the statement delivered by the European Union and would like to add a few remarks in her national capacity. At the outset, Malta condemns the most recent attacks by Russia against Kiev and other cities across Ukraine. Such indiscriminate attacks on civilians are war crimes, and the perpetrators must be held to account. Mr. President, as a member of the core group of the veto initiative, we remain firm in our belief that the General Assembly has a duty to react to the violations of international law which are being propagated in Ukraine. Malta strongly condemns and rejects attempts by Russia to illegally annex the Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions of Ukraine through the holding of the sham referenda. These so-called results constitute a serious and dangerous escalation. They are a blatant violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and show complete disregard to the fundamental principles of international law. The UN Security Council is entrusted with the maintenance of international peace and security. This is a responsibility it cannot shirk. The use, or rather the abuse, of the veto by the aggressor in an attempt to consolidate such acts is reprehensible. It is something that the rest of the UN membership must strongly reject. As incoming members of the Security Council, we stand committed to safeguarding these principles. Equally reprehensible is the rhetoric and threats concerning the use of nuclear weapons. Together, we need to reaffirm our steadfast commitment to the rules-based international order. We must act in a decisive and unequivocal manner to protect the UN Charter. This is our collective responsibility. We urge all member states to vote in favor of the resolution we have in front of us today. It is concise and to the point, and addresses recent developments in a factual manner. The costs of the war in Ukraine have reached far beyond Europe and are being felt worldwide, most acutely when it comes to the unfolding food and energy crisis. Mr. President, today, the General Assembly has the opportunity to send an important message to the world that the violation of international law and the sovereignty of states is not tolerated. These are the principles the founding members of the United Nations had agreed to 77 years ago. They are the principles we have all signed up to. Today, it is our duty to reaffirm them and counter contempt for them. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malta, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Kingdom of the Netherlands aligns itself with the statement just made by the European Union. And I thank you, Mr. President, for reconvening this emergency special session, for recognizing that these are not ordinary times. Mr. President, we are here nearly 8 months after Russia unleashed its war of aggression against Ukraine. 8 months since this assembly demanded that the Russian Federation, and I quote, immediately, completely, and unconditionally withdraw all of its military forces from the territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. 8 months that have brought hardship and food insecurity to people across the globe, plunging millions of the world's most vulnerable into hunger and poverty. And we are here because just like 8 years ago, with its illegal annexation of Crimea, Russia decided to ignore the calls of the international community and went ahead with the organization of illegal referenda in areas temporarily under its occupation. Russia did what the Secretary General warned not to do and proceeded with the illegal annexation of Ukrainian territory. And I want to state clearly, the Kingdom of the Netherlands will never recognize the sham referenda and the attempted illegal annexation of Ukrainian territory. Crimea, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk are Ukraine. The Kingdom of the Netherlands stands firmly with Ukraine and will continue to provide support for as long as it takes, as we will continue to support people all over the world who are suffering the effects of this war indirectly, from hunger and poverty to economic instability. Also, for this suffering, we must hold Russia to account. Mr. President, it is up to us, the member states of the United Nations, to stand firm for the principles we laid down in the UN Charter, to make clear that might is not right, that all of us are bound by the same fundamental principles, and that a veto does not provide a blank check. Our international rulebook is no longer just in jeopardy, it has been trampled by a permanent member of the Security Council. This is something none of us should accept. So today's meeting is about defending the principles of this international rulebook and the Charter, about protecting the legal frameworks aimed at securing peace, justice, and human rights. Those responsible for violating the Charter and for committing atrocities must be held to account. The Kingdom of the Netherlands, with The Hague as the legal capital of the world, feels a special responsibility in this regard, and we will not waver in our efforts to achieve justice for those who suffer from sexual violence, deportation, torture, and random killing. Mr. President, in conclusion, this is a war of destruction. Destruction, as we have sadly seen again early this morning with horrific missile strikes on cities across Ukraine, including the capital Kiev, targeting innocent civilians and civilian infrastructure, which we condemn in the strongest terms. As you just stated, Mr. President, the fighting must stop. So we renew our call on Russia to abide by the legally binding provisional measures ordered by the International Court of Justice, to immediately suspend its military operations and respect internationally recognized borders. As I said at this same place 7 months ago, this war needs to end, and it needs to be ended by those who started it. I therefore call on all UN member states to vote in favor of the resolution, to vote to respect the territorial integrity of our fellow UN member state, Ukraine, and to vote to defend the principles of our own Charter. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Netherlands. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Luxembourg.
Monsieur le Président, Mr. President, Luxembourg fully aligns itself with the statement made by the European Union. Allow me to supplement that statement with these remarks made in our national capacity. I wish to reaffirm the full solidarity of Luxembourg with the government and people of Ukraine. Luxembourg condemns in the strongest terms the Russian aggression against Ukraine. We condemn the deadly missile attacks that were launched by the Russian Federation against civilians in Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities. The atrocities committed by Russian armed forces in Ukraine may constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. We must do everything in our power to hold perpetrators accountable and to bring justice to victims. Luxembourg also condemns the attempted illegal annexations of the Ukrainian regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia by Russia. These regions, like Crimea, constitute an integral part of Ukrainian territory within its internationally recognized borders. As a result of the Russian veto during the vote held on 30th of September, the Security Council was once again unable to take the decisions necessary to shoulder its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Mr. President, I thank you for resuming this emergency special session of the General Assembly. This is a meeting which allows all member states of the United Nations to speak on a subject which is of concern to us all, that is the respect of the United Nations Charter and of international law. Faced with the Security Council's paralysis, it is now up to the General Assembly to rally for an international order based on the rule of law and not on the principle of might is right. The illegal annexation orchestrated by Russia and the sham referenda that preceded it constitute a flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter and of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. in these very difficult times, we cannot recall often enough the text of Article 2.4 of the Charter. All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. The Secretary-General expressed his view unequivocally. Any annexation of the territory of one state by another state as a result of the threat or use of force constitutes a violation of the principles of the United Nations Charter and of international law, and any decision taken by Russia to move to the annexation of the regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia has no legal value and must be condemned. It has no place in the modern world. Luxembourg co-sponsored and will vote in favor of the draft resolution of the General Assembly entitled Territorial Integrity of Ukraine, Defending the Principles of the UN Charter. It is a concise and targeted text which is the fruit of a transparent process, and Luxembourg calls upon all states who hold dear the respect of the United Nations Charter and of international law to support this draft. What's happening today to Ukraine can happen in other countries tomorrow if the perpetrators of this aggression are not held accountable for their acts, and if there is no resolute and united response from the international community in the face of this flagrant violation of the territorial integrity of a sovereign nation. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Luxembourg, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Dominican Republic.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
La República Dominicana
The
reitera
Dominican
su
Republic
compromiso
reiterates
con los
its
principios y
commitment
valores
to the
consagrados
principles and
en la
values
Carta de
enshrined
Naciones Unidas.
in the United Nations Charter.
Aceptar
To
y
accept
ver casi
and to see
normalizado un
almost
entorno
normalized an
internacional
international
donde
landscape
se viola la
in
Carta
which
de las
the
Naciones
United
Unidas de
Nations
manera
Charter is
consistente
consistently
es
violated
motivo
is
de enorme
a source
preocupación.
of grave concern.
Las violaciones de la Carta se
Violations
traducen
of the
en una
United
sola
Nations
cosa:
Charter produce one thing
sufrimiento
only:
y desolación humana.
suffering and human
En su
desperation.
reciente intervención en el debate
In
general
his
de esta
recent
Asamblea
statement
General,
before the general debate
nuestro
of this
ministro de
General
Relaciones
Assembly,
Exteriores
our
apuntó lo
Minister
siguiente:
for Foreign Affairs stated the
desgraciadamente,
following.
eventos como la invasión de Ucrania por parte de Rusia ha creado no solamente desconcierto por las pérdidas de vidas humanas, sino también un peligroso agravamiento del hambre en diversas regiones, muchas de estas completamente alejadas de este conflicto. Los últimos acontecientos sobre este hecho nos confirman que, lejos de atenuarse, este conflicto amenaza con extenderse e inquietantemente se van cerrando los espacios para el diálogo y la negociación hacia una salida pacífica. Una vez que Rusia ha procedido a decretar la anexión de territorios que son parte de Ucrania y ha declarado que cualquier negociación no incluirá el reconocimiento ruso de la soberanía ucraniana sobre los territorios anexados. Para la República Dominicana, como debe ser el caso para la generalidad de los países miembros de las Naciones Unidas, tener que referirse a este tema es doloroso, particularmente porque se trata de una situación que involucra violación de los derechos humanos en general, que afecta más directamente a las poblaciones del área del conflicto desatado por la agresión rusa contra Ucrania, pero que además porque pone al mundo al borde de una catástrofe. En este drama, lo más terrible es la insoportable situación de la violación del derecho humano y la imposibilidad a que se ve sometido el Consejo de Seguridad al no disponer de una salvaguarda que le permita condenar esas violaciones, algo que ha sido caracterizado como abuso del derecho al veto. No nos queda otra alternativa, pues, que utilizar esta Asamblea General para apelar al buen sentido y a la buena conciencia de las partes involucradas, a negociar una salida pacífica al conflicto al respecto del principio de la soberanía e integridad territorial de los Estados y garantizar el respeto de los derechos humanos en toda su extensión. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Dominican Republic. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President. We meet again in this special emergency session since the unprovoked and unjustified Russian aggression in Ukraine has not stopped. Actually, it has worsened. The sham referendums in Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, organized in a rush and at gunpoint, and the follow-up annexation have demonstrated to everyone, including the most skeptics, that for Russia, there is no international law, there is no UN Charter, and there is no Ukrainian constitution. Albania will not recognize the sham referenda and their pretended results. No one should. They have no legitimacy and no legal effect. Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia are and will remain Ukrainian territories, and we stand in full support to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine in its internationally recognized borders. Colleagues, we heard today again the Russian Federation trying to draw similarities between the independence of the Republic of Kosovo and the sham referenda and its illegal annexation of 4 regions in Ukraine. This is wrong and cynical. Comparing an international effort to end the conflict, protect civilians, and establish a peace process to find a lasting solution, which was the case of Kosovo, with the pure and unprovoked aggression and the sham referendum engineered in Moscow and carried out in Ukraine is more than artificial. No attempt to compare the incomparable, no easy shortcuts out of any historical and political context will help Russia divert attention from its war of choice in Ukraine or hide its blatant breach of international law. In defending the UN Charter, a few days ago, Albania and the US tabled a draft resolution in the Security Council. Again, only one country voted against and blocked the Council to act. Only one country was on the other side, isolated, disconnected from reality, hiding behind the misuse of the veto. It was the aggressor country. This is why we are here today at the UNGA, the community of peace-loving countries who respect the UN Charter and uphold the international law. Russia cannot veto the UNGA. By voting in favor of the resolution, we vote for rules, for order, for justice, for core principles, for peace and security. We cannot allow ourselves to be indifferent, and abstain cannot be a choice. We should say no to the aggression. We should say no to the annexation of territory by force. We should say no to this behavior. This is why we call on the members of the GA to vote for the resolution as presented. And I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Albania. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria.
Mr. President, Austria aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. Excellencies, dear colleagues, we meet here today to discuss yet another attempt by the Russian Federation to undermine the sovereignty and territorial integrity of its neighbor, Ukraine. An attack on one nation, but also an attack on the United Nations Charter, on international law, on the foundations that have guided the relations between states for over 7 decades. The Secretary General has made it crystal clear this is a matter that concerns us all. These annexations cannot be reconciled with the international legal framework, They flout the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. They must not be accepted. I would like to thank the Secretary General and the President of the General Assembly for their very clear statements in defense of the UN Charter and the sovereignty of Ukraine. No state can stand on the sidelines while the basic principles of our legal order are undermined. Do we want to live in a world where might prevails over the rule of law? I don't think so. It is therefore our duty to come together today and call for an end to these illegal acts. This is critical to all of us, but even more so to neutral countries like my own. The so-called referenda that Russia organized in Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia to prepare this attempted annexation were equally void of any legal basis. Let me be clear, these sham referenda cannot be called a genuine expression of the popular will. They lack legitimacy under international law and will not be recognized by us. There's also another reason why we meet today. The fact that the Security Council was yet again unable to act on this matter because Russia used its veto power. For the past few months, the Council has been unable to act on what is undoubtedly the biggest threat to international security in decades. It is thereby failing to implement its mandate. Resolution 76/262, the so-called veto initiative, was explicitly passed this year to address such situations, and we welcome the report that the Security Council submitted to this debate today. I would like to reiterate our call that the failure of the Security Council to act in such grave situations is a predicament that needs to be discussed. The new agenda for peace of the Secretary General will be an opportunity to do so. But until then, the General Assembly needs to continue to step up. It is clear what needs to be done. The General Assembly must send a strong signal that the world does not accept this blatant breach of the Charter. It must make clear that the so-called referenda were illegal, that the annexation does not have any legal basis, and that it must not be accepted, not even implicitly. This is exactly what the resolution presented to the Assembly proposes. It has been consulted with all regional groups in a transparent and inclusive manner. We will therefore vote in favor and encourage all of you to do the same. I cannot close without referring to the suffering that this war has caused in over 7 months. Thousands of civilians have been killed. Millions of people had their lives and livelihoods uprooted. The Russian attacks against civilian infrastructure in Kyiv and other parts of Ukraine in the past days are utterly unacceptable and must stop. The protection of civilians is not a choice, but a duty under international law. We have seen reports of unimaginable horrors. In Bucha, Mariupol, and Izium, previously peaceful cities that have now become associated with war crimes, torture, rape, and mass killings. These crimes must be investigated and perpetrators held to account. We fully support all efforts to do so, including by the ICC and the Commission of Inquiry based in Vienna. The senseless Russian aggression has plunged the whole world into peril. Food shortages, soaring energy prices, and nuclear blackmail serve Russia's sole purpose of trying to subdue its neighbor, with devastating consequences for the most vulnerable nations. And let me say one word on the threat of nuclear weapons. A nuclear threat is a clear violation of the principles of the UN Charter. This is completely unacceptable. Austria categorically rejects any and all nuclear threats, irrespective of the circumstances. This underscores the urgency of progress, also on nuclear disarmament, and of moving away from the nuclear deterrence paradigm. Mr. President, we call on Russia once again to stop this war, withdraw its troops from the whole territory of Ukraine, and end the bloodshed. There must be a return to meaningful negotiations and a sustainable, negotiated solution. This is the only path to peace. Austria stands in full solidarity with Ukraine, the Ukrainian government, and the Ukrainian people. And colleagues, we once again call on all of you to vote yes on the General Assembly resolution to be adopted at the end of this debate. to defend the Charter, to defend international law. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Austria. And now I offer the floor to the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein.
Mr. President, again, we meet in an emergency special session due to a further escalation of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Since its very beginning in 2014, this aggression has gone hand in hand with an attempt to deface the fundamental concepts of international law and the basic tenets of the UN Charter beyond all recognition. But the law is clear. We in this hall must uphold it, not only for the sake of Ukraine, but also to safeguard the international order to maintain peace and security. Mr. President, this Assembly unanimously agreed on a definition of aggression in 1974 at the height of the Cold War. The very first of the acts listed in that definition is, I quote, the invasion or attack by the armed forces of a state of the territory of another state, or any annexation by the use of force of the territory of another state or part thereof, end of quote. Russia's attempt to forcibly annex Ukrainian territory is thus the latest constitutive act of aggression, for which international law provides for individual criminal responsibility. Responsibility that falls on the Russian leadership. It is incumbent on us in this hall to ensure such accountability for the sake of justice, but also critically for future deterrence. This is why we, as many others, advocate for a special tribunal for the crime of aggression. We appeal to all states to join this effort in our common interest to maintain internationally agreed borders and avert future aggression. Mr. President, in its attempt to deny the reality of its aggression, Russia violates the foundational precepts of international law and of the UN Charter. It violates the prohibition of illegal use of force in the most brazen manner. It undermines the principle of territorial integrity, which is of vital importance for the maintenance of international peace and security. And it makes a mockery of the right of self-determination, which allows people to freely determine their political status. Russia's attempt to fabricate election results through blackmail and intimidation, and the use of illegal so-called referenda to justify the redrawing of Ukraine's internationally recognized borders by force, evokes the worst memories of colonial oppression and imperialism. Mr. President, these violations are not simply improvisational tactics, they are the latest example of a well-known playbook. In 2014, when Russia attempted to annex Crimea, it also sought to justify its aggression through a sham referendum. In Syria, as in Chechnya before, its relentless targeting of civilians goes hand in hand with support for so-called strongmen through rigged elections and elimination of political opposition. Russia seeks to construct an alternative reality based on disinformation, distorting our shared norms and values, while claiming to invoke them. We must collectively resist this attempt and speak truth to brute force. Mr. President, this Assembly will soon vote on a text that condemns the illegal attempt to annex parts of Ukrainian territory, a continuation of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Our consideration of this text is also an opportunity for member states to again speak up in defense of the Charter of the United Nations of territorial integrity, the sovereignty of states, genuine self-determination, and the rule of law. We therefore hope that all of you will join us in voting in favor of this resolution. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein, And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président, avant de partager avec vous mon discours, permettez-moi de condamner avec tristesse, mais aussi avec la plus grande fermeté les attaques actuelles contre les civils dans plusieurs villes ukrainiennes et exprimer nos condoléances sincères aux victimes et leurs familles. La Suisse appelle la Russie à l'arrêt immédiat. Monsieur le Président, nous nous réunissons aujourd'hui à nouveau pour une séance spéciale d'urgence afin de considérer un projet de résolution portant le titre « Intégrité territoriale de l'Ukraine, défendre les principes de la Charte ». En temps normal, nous ne devrions jamais nous retrouver ici en train de discuter de, ni même voter sur un tel projet de résolution, car il ne s'agit là non seulement d'une évidence, le respect de l'intégrité territoriale de tout pays, mais aussi d'un principe fondamental de la Charte des Nations Unies et des relations entre États membres. Nous sommes donc ici pour réaffirmer les valeurs et principes de notre Charte et pour appeler au respect du droit international public. Un ordre international fondé sur des règles revêt une grande importance pour des pays de petite et moyenne taille comme la Suisse et l'immense majorité des États de cette Assemblée. Nous ne pouvons pas tolérer que le pouvoir des plus forts prévale sur les droits des plus faibles. Le respect de la Charte constitue la base de sécurité et prospérité de toute la communauté internationale. La protéger revient donc pour nous tous à une nécessité existentielle, partout, toujours. Monsieur le Président, plus de 7 mois après le début de l'agression militaire de la Russie contre l'Ukraine, nous nous retrouvons face à une nouvelle grave violation du droit international. L'annexion du territoire ukrainien par la Russie porte atteinte à l'intégrité territoriale et à la souveraineté. La Suisse ne reconnaît pas l'intégration du territoire ukrainien dans la Fédération de Russie et appelle la Russie à la désescalade ainsi qu'au retrait complet et immédiat its forces completely and immediately from Ukrainian territory. Monsieur le Président, en plus des effets directs de l'agression militaire, les conséquences de ce conflit sont ressenties aux 4 coins du monde, et ceci dans une situation où le monde a besoin d'unité pour faire face aux défis gigantesques qui nous attendent. Les effets sont également ressentis ici, dans ce bâtiment et cette salle même, non seulement au cours de sessions comme celle à laquelle nous assistons aujourd'hui, mais aussi plus généralement. Ils se manifestent par des tensions, des divisions et une polarisation croissante entre les États membres. Et ces tensions menacent les compromis nécessaires pour avancer, pour trouver des solutions. Et donc, ces tensions nous menacent toutes et tous. Nous notons avec inquiétude certaines craintes selon lesquelles un positionnement demandant le respect du droit international et à tenir responsables ceux qui transgressent le droit pourrait être défavorable à la désescalade et à la recherche de solutions. Nous rejetons vigoureusement cette idée. Le droit international doit prévaloir à tout moment, surtout en période de crise et de troubles politiques. Le respect du droit international constitue une condition essentielle à une paix durable. Il est difficile de parler de paix alors que la guerre fait rage, que des douleurs inexprimables sont causées et que l'avenir est incertain, tant pour les jeunes en Ukraine comme en Russie, mais aussi ailleurs dans un monde qui souffre des conséquences de cette guerre. Et pourtant, la paix est ce à quoi nous devons aspirer. Rejetons aujourd'hui les récits de haine. Battons-nous contre la création de contre-vérités et contre la désinformation systématique qui nous divise. Envoyons un signal clair en faveur des faits, du droit international et de la responsabilité de celles et ceux qui le violent. La Suisse condamne fermement les attaques incessantes de la Russie contre les zones résidentielles dans différentes villes ukrainiennes. La Suisse appelle la Russie à cesser immédiatement ces attaques indiscriminées. Les civils sont protégés par le droit international humanitaire. La Suisse est gravement préoccupée par les conséquences humanitaires du conflit armé en Ukraine et les milliers de victimes qu'il fait. Le respect du droit international humanitaire par toutes les parties est crucial pour limiter ces conséquences humanitaires. La Suisse réitère réitère son appel au strict respect du droit international humanitaire et des droits de l'homme. La protection de la population civile et des personnes hors de combat est une obligation et doit être assurée. Nous encourageons les initiatives à cet égard. Nous appelons à ce que l'accès rapide et sans entrave de l'aide humanitaire soit garanti sur l'ensemble du territoire ukrainien et dans les zones occupées par la Russie. En ligne avec sa tradition humanitaire, la Suisse réitère son offre de bons officiers. Dans cet esprit, la Suisse exprime aussi, comme dans l'OP7 de la résolution sous examen, son soutien ferme aux efforts du secrétaire général pour désamorcer la situation. Les Nations unies sont une plateforme unique et universelle de dialogue et de coopération. Si nous, États membres, restons unis à défendre ces valeurs et principes. Monsieur le Président, la Suisse est un pays neutre. La neutralité mène à nous abstenir de fournir des soutiens militaires. Mais la neutralité ne nous empêche pas de nous mobiliser pour le droit international, humanitaire, pour la Charte des Nations Unies et pour ses principes. Nous toutes et tous dans cette salle avons la responsabilité collective de défendre ce qui nous unit, ce qui unit les Nations Unies. Par conséquent, la Suisse a co-sponsorisé et soutient le projet de résolution proposé par l'Ukraine et appelle tous les États membres à en faire de même. Je vous remercie.
I thank the distinguished representative of Switzerland, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Mr. President, Excellencies, in February, the General Assembly met in an emergency special session to condemn Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. And today, we meet again to condemn Russia's sham referenda and attempted illegal annexation of the Ukrainian regions of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, and Donetsk, the largest forcible annexation attempt since the Second World War. Putin is trying to take Ukraine's land, its resources, its identity. In doing so, he is overturning the most sacred principle in the international system, that borders cannot be drawn by force. Over 7 months into the war, the whole world understands the terrible cost of Russia's invasion. In Ukraine, families count that cost in the bodies exhumed from mass graves, in the rubble of flattened towns, and the lost education for millions of innocent children, and in the growing list of friends and relatives detained or forcibly deported through Russia's filtration process. Even this morning, millions across Ukraine awoke to the sound of air raid sirens as Russia carried out one of the largest bombardments of civilian areas and infrastructure in the war. Around the world, people and governments are suffering from the unaffordable cost of higher food and energy prices. As a result of Russia's invasion, everyone's lives have been made more difficult and more insecure. And here in New York, we also see the cost in terms of damage to the UN Charter. The UN Charter enshrines the principle that no threat or use of force shall be made against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. We have no way to resolve disputes or achieve the fundamental goals of the UN if we concede this principle. If any rogue head of state can, by force or fiat, change the borders of another UN member. This Assembly's call on Russia since the start of its illegal invasion has been simple. End this war and withdraw from Ukraine. For the sake of Ukraine, Russia, and the entire UN membership, we reiterate this call today. We call on Russia to end the war and honor the UN Charter. Colleagues, at the end of this debate, we will have an opportunity to vote on a resolution to condemn Russia's so-called referenda and illegal annexation. We urge everyone here to vote in support of international law, the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states, and the UN Charter. We urge all members to vote yes on the resolution. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President,
Excelencias,
Excellencies,
agradecemos el informe especial presentado por el Consejo de Seguridad a la luz de la resolución 76/262 de esta Asamblea General, la cual sigue siendo aplicable al caso que nos ocupa. De nueva cuenta, un veto en el Consejo de Seguridad nos congrega en esta Asamblea. Se trata, como se ha dicho, del veto de la Federación Rusa del pasado 30 de septiembre al proyecto de resolución S/2022/720 relativo a los referendos celebrados recientemente en territorio de Ucrania, en las localidades de Donetsk, Lugansk, Gerson y Zaporizhia, con miras a su posterior anexión. México votó a favor de dicho proyecto de resolución como miembro electo del Consejo de Seguridad y haremos lo propio en esta Asamblea con base en nuestro inquebrantable
position is grounded in our unwavering commitment to and support for stringent compliance with international law, in particular with the principle of the prohibition of territorial expansion through the use of force or through other actions inconsistent with the Charter of the United Nations.
Como lo mencionamos desde el día en que se confirmó la invasión rusa sobre Ucrania en febrero pasado, México como país independiente ha sido víctima de 4 invasiones militares y como consecuencia de una de ellas perdió cerca de la mitad de su territorio nacional. México no puede, pues, bajo circunstancia alguna, aceptar que otro país sea también víctima de este tipo de actos de agresión. En las últimas semanas se ha planteado la idea de una aparente tensión entre el derecho a la autodeterminación de los pueblos y el derecho a la integridad territorial de los estados.
como si se
It is
tratara
as
de
if we were
nociones
talking about
contrarias
dichotomous
respecto de
notions,
las cuales la
and as
comunidad
if the international
internacional
community were
debiera
forced to
optar
prioritize
para dar
one
prioridad a una
over
por
another.
encima de la otra. Para mi país
For my country,
no existe
there
tal
is
dilema.
no such dilemma.
Si entendemos al
If we
derecho
understand
internacional
international law
como un
as a
sistema
system
en el que
in which
estos
these
principios
principles are
se
applied
aplican bajo
according
criterios y
to the
condiciones
criteria
de
and
situaciones
conditions
específicas,
unique to specific
no hay
situations,
cabida
there
para
is
las
no
falsas
place for
dicotomías
false dichotomies,
y mucho
and
menos
far
para
less for
interpretaciones que permitan
interpretations which
que uno de esos
allow one
principios
of these
sea
principles to
invocado
be
en
invoked
abierta
in open
violación a la
violation
Carta de las
of the
Naciones
United
Unidas.
Nations Charter.
Lo anterior
The
quedó
above
claramente
was clearly
establecido en la
established
resolución
in Resolution
2625 de la
2625
Asamblea
of the
General,
General Assembly.
la cual señala
This
que el goce y el
resolution
ejercicio del
states
derecho a la
that
libre determinación de los pueblos
the enjoyment
no puede
of the right to
ser
self-determination
entendido, y
cannot
cito,
be construed, and I
en el
quote,
sentido
as
de que
authorizing
autoriza o
or
fomenta
encouraging
acción
any
alguna
action
encaminada
which
a
would
quebrantar
dismember
o
or
menoscabar
impair
total o
in whole
parcialmente
or in
la
part
integridad
the
territorial
territorial
de estados
integrity of
soberanos e
sovereign and
independientes.
independent
Termina
states.
cita.
End quote.
En suma,
In sum,
esta norma del
this
derecho
norm of
internacional,
international law,
que se deriva de
which
la
is
propia
grounded
Carta de la
in the
ONU
United Nations
y
Charter
que ha
itself,
sido
and which has been
refrendada tanto
endorsed
por la
so
Asamblea
strongly
General
by the General
como
Assembly
por el
and by
Consejo
the
de
Security
Seguridad
Council,
y en
as
la
well as by
jurisprudencia de
the
la Corte
jurisprudence
Internacional
of
de
the
Justicia,
ICJ,
hace que los llamados
means
referendos
that the
celebrados en los
so-called referenda
territorios
held in
ocupados
the
en
occupied
Ucrania
territories in Ukraine
carezcan de
lack
validez
all
jurídica.
legal validity.
Más aún,
Furthermore,
el hecho de que
the
este
fact that
ejercicio
this
se
exercise
haya
was
llevado a cabo
conducted
en un
in a
territorio que
territory
sufre
enduring
una
a
invasión
military
militar
invasion
hace nugatoria
means
cualquier
that any
expresión
expression
de
of
voluntad
popular
popular.
will here is null and
México
void.
defiende la
Mexico
soberanía,
defends
la unidad
the
nacional,
sovereignty,
la independencia y la
the
integridad
national
territorial
unity,
de
rather,
Ucrania
independency
dentro de
and
sus fronteras
integrity, territorial
internacionalmente
integrity of
reconocidas.
Ukraine within its internationally recognized
Así
borders.
ha sido desde
And
el
we have
inicio
done
de
just
esta
that
guerra.
since the very beginning of this
Cualquier
war.
intento de anexión
Any
territorial
attempt at
representa una
territorial
escalada del
annexation
conflicto armado,
constitutes an escalation of the
incluida
armed
una
conflict,
amenaza nuclear
including a
o
nuclear
un
threat
accidente
or nuclear
nuclear,
accident.
en tanto no se delimite un
Insofar
perímetro
as
seguro en torno
there
a la
is no
planta nuclear de
delineation
Zaporizhia
of a
o
secure
se
perimeter
garantice la
around the
seguridad de
nuclear
cualquier
power
otro.
plant of Zaporizhia, and
Los
insofar as there are
ataques
no
recientes
guarantees
a la
given for the safety
infraestructura
of any
civil,
other. The recent attacks
contrarios
on
al
civilian
derecho internacional
infrastructure,
humanitario,
which run counter to
profundizan
international
día tras
humanitarian
día
law,
la gravedad
worsen
del
day by day
conflicto
the
y los
seriousness of the
costos de la
conflict
guerra
and
sobre
increase
la
the
sociedad.
costs of the war
En
borne
este
by civil
contexto,
society. Against this
resultan
backdrop,
urgentes
it is not only
los esfuerzos
necessary,
del
but
secretario
rather
general
urgent
y de
to
otros
see the
posibles
continuance of
actores
the efforts of the
internacionales
Secretary General and of other
capaces de
possible international
convocar a una
actors
tregua
capable of
para
convening a
fomentar el
truce,
diálogo y retomar la
efforts that is to
diplomacia,
encourage dialogue, to
para
resume
encontrar las
diplomacy,
vías
and
políticas
to
que
find
pongan
political
fin a la
pathways
guerra,
that can
como
put
lo
an
ha
end to the
propuesto
war, as
reiteradamente
my
mi
country
país.
has proposed time and time again.
Concluyo coincidiendo
I conclude
seguramente con la
by
mayoría
undoubtedly
de los
expressing
estados
agreement
aquí
with the
presentes
majority of
sobre
states
la
here present
importancia de que la Asamblea General
regarding the
se
importance that the General
pronuncie sobre la
Assembly
causa
speak
de
out
esta
clearly
sesión especial de
regarding the
emergencia.
cause of this emergency special
No se
session.
puede,
It is not
a través de
possible
un veto,
through a veto
eliminar
to eliminate
ni
nor
desestimar
to
el
discredit
andamiaje de
the
reglas e
edifice of
instituciones jurídicas
legal rules
que
and
hemos
institutions
construido
that we
entre
have
todos
built
en el
collectively
seno de
within
nuestra
our
organización
organization.
y que tienen como único
The rules and
propósito
institutions
la
whose only
convivencia
purpose is
pacífica
to ensure the
entre las
peaceful
naciones del
coexistence
mundo.
of nations of the
El
world.
mal llamado derecho de veto
The
ha
ill-titled
estado
right of
presente
veto
en las
has been
discusiones
present
de
in the
esta Asamblea
discussions
General
of this General
desde
Assembly
la
since the
fundación
very
de la ONU.
inception of the United
Es
Nations.
tiempo
it
de
is time
encontrar
to
una
find
solución
a collective and
y
systematic
para
solution to restrict the use of the veto in specific
Invitamos a
circumstances.
las delegaciones que no lo han hecho
We invite
a
delegations that have
examinar la
not yet done so
iniciativa
to consider
franco-mexicana
the
de restricción
Franco-Mexican
voluntaria del
initiative
veto
ensuring the
frente a
voluntary
situaciones de
suspension of the
atrocidades
veto in the
masivas
case of mass
y a
atrocities.
suscribirla.
And we encourage these
La
delegations
iniciativa
to
cuenta
sign
ya
it.
con
The initiative
106
already
estados
has
signatarios.
106
El
signatory
verdadero
states.
dilema que nos
The
ocupa
real
en el
dilemma that
contexto
we are
de
grappling
esta
with in the
sesión de
context of
emergencia
this emergency session is
es
whether we do or do not wish to do something more effective, so as to avoid that this circumstance, which is so regrettable, continues to occur time and time again. Many thanks indeed.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico. Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard the last speaker in the debate on this item for this meeting. We shall hear the remaining speakers on Wednesday morning, 12th of October at 10 o'clock a.m. in this hall. This meeting is adjourned.